Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Howard Assembly Room, to Leeds Song, and to tonight's recital. As you will know, Alice Coote is unwell and had to withdraw, but typically Joseph Middleton has recruited a brilliant new singer to take her place, with a program that's nearly as diverse as Alice Coote's. People like me who give talks are a little disturbed when they have to give a talk about a recital that contains 20 different items, because it's hard to figure out what to identify. And I'm basically going to do what I was going to do with Alice, which is just pick some things and talk about them. I will not talk about one or two things at all, and I'll focus about the things that I feel more comfortable with. So I'm going to begin with Handel's Ombra mai fu, possibly one of the most well-known Handel tunes. Ombra mai fu is a surprising aria in many ways, and we take it for granted a little too much. It comes at the very opening, after the overture, of Handel's opera Circe, which is Xerxes. It's set around the Hellespont, the joint between Turkey and Greece. And it's set there, but it was a complete failure. He had an opening night and 5 performances in London, and then it was pulled off the stage. And that was in 1738. In the 19th century, however, this single aria was rediscovered and was arranged for every imaginable musical instrument, and was one of the most popular pieces to be recorded when acoustic recording first began in the later 1890s. Handel himself adapted this aria from an earlier version of the same words by Giovanni Bononcini, and Bononcini adapted the whole thing from an earlier opera by Francesco Cavalli in the 17th century. All 3 composers used the same libretto. That's the only thing they have in common, by Niccolo Minato. And I'm just going to play a tiny phrase of Bononcini's Ombra mai fu. It's exactly the same words, but the voice starts, and musicians here might not know that I'm reading in soprano clef here, but the voice starts like this, and then we have, and that phrase comes directly quoted in Ombra mai fu. Handel also quotes a little musical phrase from another aria he wrote nearly 20 years earlier for Radamisto, which, oddly enough, Alice Coote would have sung. There is a connection there. But it's an odd opera, and one reason why it didn't succeed is because of the particular reasons why it's odd. The King of Persia opens this opera by thanking a tree for providing shade. And the words, Ombra mai fu di vegetabile, this is, as far as I know, the only operatic aria in which that word is used. Vegetabile, cara ed amabile soavi più. He's so grateful to the tree for providing sweet shade. And then his brother walks in with his rather comic servant along with him. They stop and listen. And then this other guy's sweetheart starts making fun of Xerxes by saying that Xerxes is in love with a tree, but the tree does not return his affection. And in the libretto, I thought I'd share this with you because people don't often do this. The libretto of the opera was published in Italian and English for the audience then. If you went to the opera in those days, you had a copy of the words in your hand. You could follow the words while the singer was singing. They didn't have these things, but they had a little pamphlet. To the reader, the contexture of this drama is so easy, it would be troubling the reader to give him a long argument to explain it. Such imbecilities and the temerity of Xerxes, such as his being deeply enamored of a tree, and the building a bridge over the Hellespont to unite Asia to Europe, are the basis of the story. The rest is fiction. Which I think is the best tongue-in-cheek introduction to a libretto I've ever seen. And yes, when Circe sings about a nice vegetable giving him shade, his brother's girlfriend says, "See the loving Xerxes enamored with a tree, yet no return to love it gives, but the soft murmur of its leaves." And you laugh, they laughed too. Because this opera was a mixture of comedy and seriousness, not tragedy, but seriousness. By the 1730s, opera seria, serious opera, was well established. And the opera seria form depended crucially on the format of the aria. The three-part aria. A, you sing one thing, B, a contrasting thing, and then you sing A again with some extra ornaments. More or less tasteful, more or less original, but you do the A section again. There is an alternative short form of this, which is just A. There's a lot to be said about A. Basically, the opera ends rather quickly, and the hard-working cello section is very glad of that. But this piece was full of this kind of short aria form, known as a cavatina or an arioso. Two names are both used. And it was full of them because Handel had been rather influenced by a more popular form of opera called ballad opera, typically in English, which was very successful in London at that time. And he had that model at the back of his mind when he was writing this opera Xerxes. So when you hear Ombra Mai Fu, it is a very beautiful aria, very simple, very dignified, but it has this strange comic context as well. And the Earl of Shaftesbury was a very pompous gentleman who wrote pompous letters to his son. He went to the first performance and he liked it. He said, "The airs, for brevity's sake, as the opera would be too long, have no recitative leading from one to the other. It's difficult to understand because of this until it becomes by frequent hearing well known. My own judgment is it is a capital opera, notwithstanding it is called a ballad one." However, the musicologist Charles Burney, later in the 18th century, was much more knowledgeable than Shaftesbury. He criticized Xerxes. He said, "I've not been able to discover the words of this drama, but it's the worst Handel ever set to music. For besides feeble writing, there is a mixture of tragic comedy and buffoonery in it, which Apostolo Zeno and Metastasio had banished from serious opera." And when he says serious opera, he means opera seria. So it comes as a remarkable thing that we associate it now with this slow, dignified Handelian idiom, which was what the English in particular thought of Handel in the 19th century. But it comes from this much more complicated little background. And it's the only thing that has really become so very popular. And yeah, I just have time. Here at Leeds Song, we spare no pains in searching out the obscure. Here is an English translation of Ombra Mai Fu. That is an Italian aria which has precisely 10 words in it. Okay, that's one reason it's short. At one time, people translated opera to try to keep the same sounds, but not necessarily the same meaning. Never was hour so fit for festival. Festival, because it sounds like vegetable. Brightest and best of all summer's full flower, nature's kind power, her prodigality makes the reality, love's richest it just goes on and on. It's completely meaningless. No one would have understood that at the time. So I just thought I'd mention that. Moving swiftly on, I'm going to talk about Das Knaben Wunderhorn, because songs from Das Knaben Wunderhorn are spaced out through this recital program, and there's quite a lot of background about this collection of songs that I'd like to talk about. So, Das Knaben Wunderhorn was a collection of folk poetry, published around 1805 to 1808, edited by Achim von Arnim and Clemens Brentano. It was very popular. It was read right through the German-speaking world. It was dedicated to Goethe, and Goethe wrote in a review something very interesting in terms of how people collected folk material, words, and tunes. He said, "By rights, this little book would find a place in every house where bright and vital people make their home. Best of all, this volume might lie on the piano of the amateur or master of musical composition, so that these songs might come into their own by being matched to familiar and traditional melodies, that they might have appropriate tunes fitted to them, or that, God willing, they will inspire new and significant melodies." So the words are given to you, and the idea is that you add your own tunes. And several composers did exactly that. Mendelssohn, Schoenberg, they set poems from Das Knaben Wunderhorn. And the editors freely adapted the poems and quite often wrote them from scratch themselves. There's a thing called fake song. Some of you may know this. David Harker, an academic at the Open University, coined this expression about 30-odd years ago, I think. What we now know as folk songs, he says, were collected, edited, and published by individuals who are either members of the bourgeoisie or sympathetic to bourgeois culture. The working people who sang those songs are remarkably absent from the history of folk song. So he called it fake song. And it is indeed a middle-class pursuit, and it carries on being a middle-class pursuit right through the 19th century and into the 20th. What Arnim and Brentano were doing was creating, or helping to create, a romantic myth about Germany. At that time, there is no country called Germany. There are a lot of places where people speak German, but there isn't a German polity, if you like. There isn't a German identity in the sense that there's one place which is the most important city, there's one ruling system, there's one legal system, all that kind of thing. And at that time, when Das Knaben Wunderhorn was being assembled, Germany, or Prussia rather, had suffered a significant military defeat when Napoleon captured Berlin. So what it was to be German was really up for grabs, and they needed general feeling that some new kind of identity had to be created. And Katie Hamilton talked a little bit about this a few days ago, if you were at her talk. The modern concept of a nation was first used by the 18th century philosopher Herder, and I won't bore you with the details, fascinating though they are. But the point was that the nation was not a political unit, it was a cultural one. The nation was defined by language, first of all. Culture generally, art, music, dance, all that kind of thing. And in the 19th century, you see national identity being marked or signaled in opera particularly. If the happy peasants come on and dance a happy peasant song, singing their traditional folk songs, they are saying, we really like being, let's say, Russian or Czech or something like that. And that is a Herderian concept of nationality. Later on, of course, having your own opera house and opera repertoire was also a step you had to take. If you were previously not a nation and wanted to be a nation, you had to get opera as well. But if you had an ancient language, that was easily the most important thing. So that was part of what Das Knaben Wunderhorn was a part of. It was celebrating Germanness. And that crops up also, I'm talking a bit about Schöne Müllerin tomorrow. That crops up again in the origins of that song. In Knaben Wunderhorn, there are a few details which I just want to point out. Do I? No, I want to talk about, you'll hear the details. It's very obvious. There's quite a nice one in Wer hat dies Liedlein erdacht, which sounds like yodeling. If you think about the Lonely Goat Herd song from The Sound of Music, you'll hear a bit of that in it. And at the closing lines where the singer says, if you can't sing this little song, you can whistle it. It goes up to a whole series of high notes, which are really quite taxing for the amateur singer that this was aimed at. You have to hit this high note 7 times in a row. It will be completely hit out of the park tonight. But yeah, it's a little joke there. If you can't manage all these notes, then you can whistle it. But what I want to talk to you now, because it is from my native land and I'm running out of time, our singer tonight, Beth, is performing Annie Laurie. Now, this is a good example of fake song. It is not a traditional Scottish song. In the 13th century, there were no happy peasants in the Highlands singing Annie Laurie. Okay? It didn't happen. Not in Gaelic, not in Scots, not in anything. It was written in possibly the 17th century by a named poet, a man called William Douglas. He was a Jacobite from Dumfriesshire. He seems to have written it. It's not clear, but it probably was him. And he wooed a real woman called Annie Laurie. And we have her portrait. We know her birth and death dates. We know a lot about Annie Laurie. She's not some fictitious person from a poem. You know? But the words were altered in the early 19th century, and they only got a tune then. The tune is a 19th century tune, created by an aristocratic Scottish lady called Lady John Scott, who claimed that she had found the words in some obscure source. She adapted them, she changed them, and she added a tune. It's a typical Scots song. It is smooth, melodic, and it has large intervals. I won't sing to you much, but you know the tune. You might join in. Pa pa pom pa pom pa pa pom pa 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 pom pa pom pa pa pa. That kind of leap is absolutely standard in Scottish song, and it's quite distinctive. Some songs have much bigger intervals than that. I won't hurt you by singing those. The problem with songs like Annie Laurie were exactly that they were very popular. Scottish people in the early 19th century loved songs like Annie Laurie, so much that it inhibited the development of classical music in Scotland. There was a famous remark that a colleague of mine came up with. She found a journalist saying that in the early 19th century, Scottish audiences didn't like what they called Italian twirly-whirlies. Over-ornamented Italian song, Rossini, that kind of thing, over-elaborate. They wanted simple, moving, touching melodies. And that held sway right for a very long time. There were singers later in the 19th century in Scotland who had entire careers singing nothing else all over the world to expatriate Scottish communities in South Africa, Australia, America, all sorts of places, Canada. So Italian twirly-whirlies were out, and songs like Annie Laurie were definitely in. It did, however, have a strange afterlife, because, as I said, we at Leeds Song spare no pains. Sousa arranged it as a march for brass band in 1883. It was made into a play, reviewed in the Birkenhead News of 1916. A very fascinating little play adapted from the Scotch song. The sweet simplicity of the piece is a marked point throughout. The scenery is extremely realistic, and on the first rise of the curtain, the audience finds itself in part of a typical Scotch, he says, Scotch village on the banks of the famous Allan Water, that's in Dumfries. The farm in the scene is splendid. Also the hens and pigeons, and a well-trained dog, which give a more natural touch to the picture. So they knew how to have fun then. And there was a silent film, Annie Laurie, in 1927, with Lillian Gish as Annie. They mix up the story a bit, so she gets involved with the massacre of Glencoe in 1692. I know, I couldn't believe it either, but it's true. And it was a silent film, but there was music written to be played, instrumentally in the theatre. And that music apparently had the tune of Annie Laurie going right through it all the time. So you could have gone to see Lillian Gish acting. And there is an American edition with a German translation, which is meant to sound like Lieder. And I'm just going to read you a couple of chunks of it, if I can find it. I think it's here. Hang on. Oh, I seem to have mislaid it. I have to spare you that. Oh dear. Well, you'll just have to take my word for it that Annie Laurie in German sounds remarkably like Schubert. And Annie is, of course, something like Enchen. So it does work, and it rhymes and all that kind of thing. And of course, that was made in America because there was a significant German population in America at that time, especially in roughly the eastern side of the United States. There were German language newspapers for the German communities who lived there. So this arrangement would have been directed at them. I had prepared a few remarks about Les Resquilles and the Forest song. I think that time is moving on. So I think I'll draw to a close there. Thank you very much for your attention.